My name is Nate, if I haven't met you, and it's such a privilege to spend some time with you. Everybody who's watching online, thank you for joining in as well. And I always want to just make a special just expression of gratefulness for all of those who are joining us who are, we call it being spiritually unresolved. You're not quite sure what you believe. Thanks for having the courage to tune in or to come into the room. And we hope that this is a safe place for you to explore an incredibly dangerous and life-altering message, right? So it's a safe place to explore who Jesus is and his teachings. So we're starting this new series. Now, the first thing I have to ask is this. When our communications person put this together, I asked him, what is Ctrl Z? And what does that have to do with what would Jesus undo? How many of you know what Ctrl Z does on your computer? Okay. How many of you are like me and you're either old or clueless or something? And okay, the majority. So if you get nothing out of this series, I found out that Ctrl Z will undo what you just did on your computer, right? So hopefully don't push it accidentally, but I guess it can be a tool. So as I was contemplating just Christmas and what's happening, I started to get really excited about this thought that Jesus came to undo things that humanity, with all of our collective efforts and all of our religions and all our philosophy, we were never able to fix, that Jesus came to heal it. So we're gonna look at several of the different biographers of Jesus' life. They're Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we're gonna look at how they present Jesus as someone who came to fix or to undo something that was catastrophic in our lives. And this week we're gonna look at the book of John. In just a moment, we'll look at that. But before we begin, I just wanted to throw this out as we've got a couple weeks till Christmas. Probably most of us have heard, we're familiar with the word Advent. And I grew up with this word Advent, and I never really understood what it meant. I knew it meant like a calendar, and it was super tempting that there was like a chocolate under every day, and you're like, can't we just do it all the first day, like eat them all? It was this sense of anticipation. So I just wanted to take a few moments and look back over centuries of church history and just help us maybe to tune into this whole idea a little bit. So the word Advent in the Latin, it means arrival. It means the arrival of an important person. So there's two components to this word. One is somebody important is coming. Here's the second component. We do everything we can to prepare for this important guest. Okay, so Thanksgiving a couple weeks ago, Jen and I had this, we didn't know when this would happen, but we had this unbelievable privilege of all four of our kids were at home. The two who are married, their spouses came home. And then she had family from Arizona and from Washington. I had family from Washington. And everybody gathered together with my parents. There's 26 of us in our living room eating Thanksgiving. It was phenomenal. But because we knew this was gonna happen, there was all types of preparation, which included, do you remember where we put that folding table? Who can we borrow folding chairs from? And it even got into this. The carpet in that room is awful. So like I scrambled and removed carpet and put it in a different floor. And we did all of this because we had important guests coming and our job was to prepare for them. So that's exactly what the idea of Advent is hundreds of years ago, the church said, the arrival of Jesus Christ to planet Earth is too big of a deal to relegate to just one day on the calendar. Like we can't just say December 25th. They said, what if we took the month of December and prepared our lives, our hearts, our minds for the arrival of not Santa, but the arrival of Jesus and all that that means in our world. So I would just encourage you, find a tradition. If you're single, if you're married, if you got a family, find a tradition that throughout the month you prepare your heart, that you're readying yourself for the arrival of God to planet Earth. Look for Jesus in the midst of the mundane. In fact, we're gonna talk about that at our Christmas Eve services. The majesty in the midst of the mundane, okay? So, Advent. Now, let's turn our attention to the book of John. John introduces Jesus in a very different way. Okay, for any of us who are sentimental and we love the nativity and all that, John doesn't even pay attention to that. There are no wise men, there's no shepherds, there's no Mary, there's no Joseph. Like John says, I want to introduce Jesus and I'm not going to use any of that. And it's because he's doing something unique. John is writing his book to a mixed group of people. So some of them are Jewish, but probably the majority of his audience are non-Jewish people, known as Gentiles, right? So they're not familiar with any of the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus. And so all those details don't matter. John uses Greek words. He's gonna snatch 3 really significant words from Greek philosophy and bring them into his introduction of the person of Jesus. So here's what he wants to do. He wants to have his non-Jewish readers read about the arrival of Jesus to planet Earth, and he just drops this bombshell on them. This bombshell that reaches back into ancient Jewish philosophy. And he says, when Jesus came to Earth, everything changes. And Jesus undoes 2 significant things. He undid the mystery surrounding God. We'll talk about that. And he undid the darkness that had enveloped human beings. Okay, so let's read through the first several verses of the book of John, his introduction of Jesus. And we're going to pause. And because these words are absolutely loaded, we're going to make our way through it quite slowly. Are you ready? John chapter 1, John's introduction of the person of Jesus. In the beginning, okay, 3 words in and we have to stop. What does that remind you of? Anybody who's read the beginning of the Bible? How does the Bible begin? Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning. And John wants everybody to know that he is associating the arrival of Jesus Christ to planet Earth as a new creation, a new start for human life. So in Genesis chapter 1, the earth is described this way. It was formless and void and dark and chaotic. And God takes the chaos, the primordial mess, and begins to give it order and life. And so John says this, and when Jesus comes 2,000 years ago, the one who created everything is returning to his creation. And this time he's not making matter, but he's taking the primordial mess, the chaos and the darkness within human lives, and he's going to create order and meaning in life, okay? So he associates it with the creation. In the beginning was, here's our next thing, the Word. You'll notice it has a capital. And what is the Word? So the Greek word is logos. And logos was this word that Plato and Aristotle and the ancient Greek philosophers, they defined it as cosmic reason or ultimate truth. And so John takes this Greek idea that there's somewhere out there, there's something that will help us make sense of life. The ultimate truth, because everybody has truths, right? Everybody has perspectives. He says, but there's this one ultimate reason that makes sense of everything that happens to us. And so John says, I'm going to tell you who the Logos is. The thing that the Greek philosophers and all religions have been searching for is the person of Jesus. And so he gives the word Logos, he turns it into a proper name, and he says, in the beginning was Jesus, who is the cosmic reason, who is the ultimate understanding, the epitome of wisdom. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So this cosmic reasoning that all philosophers and religious leaders have been trying to find, he says, no. It's actually in God. Truth, reality is found in him. He was with God in the very beginning. It's not something new. It's ancient. Jesus, the Logos, through him, all things were made. The one who created life is returning to earth to recreate life, to do a new form of creation, not of plants and animals and water and light and darkness, but he's coming to heal and recreate what has been chaotic for centuries within the human life. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life. Okay, this word is zoe, and then life, light is photos. These are two more important Greek philosophical words where they're always looking for life and they're looking for light. And this is what John says. When God came to earth through the person of Jesus, not only did he bring ultimate truth and reality and cosmic reason, he brought life. As the Creator returns, with him comes the potential for the human life to be resurrected. For the dead spirituality, because after Genesis 3, it's this story of humans trying to make their way to God while they're spiritually decrepit and bankrupt. And he says, when Jesus came, there's this possibility for a human being to be made new, and light and life come. Light and life are always associated. You can't grow anything without light, right? He says, so Jesus comes and he is light and he is life. He's the embodiment of both. And he says, it's the light of all mankind. So at the very beginning, John says this isn't just for the Jewish people. At the outside of his book, he says, when Jesus came, the Logos, the truth, the light, the life, he came for everyone. For whatever your language is that you spoke in your home, whatever the tint of your skin, that this is a gift for all of humanity. The light, person of Jesus, shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So this idea that the world internally is dark and murky and chaotic, that when Jesus comes, this light is inherently powerful. The light can never extinguish the darkness. You can't put out light with darkness. You can bring light into darkness and you see illumination. He says, so here's this God who's now coming to planet Earth, and he is light. And now we begin to see for the first time in centuries. We begin to understand what truth is, who God is. The next few verses are about John the Baptist. Read those on your own. We're going to jump into verse 9. The true light, meaning there's been false lights. There's been lots of other philosophies that gives light to everyone. Again, he says this is for everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world. And though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. So John says, the original creator comes back to his creation. But so much has gone wrong within the human species that when the creator comes back, we don't even notice who he is. Because he came back not as a Roman emperor, not as a king. He comes back into like the very mundane circumstances. He comes back born into a peasant family. He comes back to a family that's so poor, they don't have a place to stay. He comes back into the midst of a scandal. Did you know that everyone, you know what they thought when Mary and Joseph, who are engaged, and Mary's pregnant, and they both go, hey, it wasn't me. No, we've honored we've been very moral. What would you do? You'd be like, yeah. If a 15, 16, 17-year-old girl came to you saying, hey, I'm pregnant and I've never had sex before, you're like, God comes back and he's so involved in the rough and tumble reality of what human life really is. That what? People couldn't recognize him. This is not what we anticipated if God ever came back to earth. He came to that which was his own, the world that he created. But his own did not receive him. It was too mundane. It's too organic. Yet, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So John brings this idea in that rather than being subservient, rather than being slaves, rather than being used by God, what Jesus came to do in this new creative act is he came to change our status so that a human being could be known as a child of God, a child of the King. Meaning he looks at you, and now because of what Jesus did, because this new creation, you can be called a son or a daughter of God. Brought into the family, brought into the palace, brought into a new reality. That relationship with God that had been severed through Jesus can now be healed. Children born not out of natural descent, nor of a human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. This creation, to be reborn, is miraculous. You're not born again. You can't heal yourself through religion, through sacrifice, through devotion, through being pious. This miracle, this creation that Jesus came to do is from God, is born of God. The Word, the Logos, cosmic reality, the ultimate truth, became flesh. Oh. So if you are a Greek person reading this in the first century, this, ladies and gentlemen, is an offensive statement. It's absolutely offensive because you have been taught by the ancient philosophers that there are two things in this world, and they are very distinct and they never commingle. There is the natural world made up of matter. So it's this table, it's this floor, it's this body, it's the carpet, it's the ceiling, and everything that you can see is made of matter, and matter is inherently evil. That is what was believed in the first century, that all of this is broken. But there's a second world, and that is the immaterial world, the spiritual world, and that is all good. And the two never combined. And here's what John says. The ultimate reality, the cosmic truth, became flesh and blood. Entered into the human condition, into the genetic stream of humanity. This perfect God wasn't offended by the material world, but instead he's heartbroken by what has happened, and he enters into our worlds, and then he made his dwelling among us. God came and lived with us, and he's going to tell us why that is so important. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father. This is absolutely essential. He came from the Father full of, not half and half, but notice this, full of grace and full of truth. Full of grace and full of truth. Okay. So I want to talk about two things. Number one, Jesus undid the mystery surrounding the nature of God. That is what John is trying to communicate to us in part. So think about ancient cultures. Think about even present day. Here's what human beings have done. If we do not know who God is, we will make a God. And we will make a God in our image. So think of ancient Egyptians. They made their gods, and they decided this is the nature of the gods. Think of today. Here's what we're tempted to do. We make a God, and we make a God that works really well for us, okay? That is the human condition because we don't know what God is really like. And the ancients had all of these gods, and all of these gods, most of them were pretty angry, and they were frustrated by human beings. And here's what John says. For the first time, we know what God is like. He's a God who's filled with two distinct things, grace and truth. Let me show you a picture. So in the first century, the Greek readers who were part of the Roman Empire, who would have received this book, this is in part the plurality of gods that they had to appease. So they all have a Greek and a Latin name. So you've got Kronos, Saturn, who's the god of time. You've got Apollos, Jupiter. You've got Juno, who's the queen of all the gods. You've got Aphrodite and Eros. You've got Mars and Ares, the gods of war. You've got gods of romance. You've got gods of everything. And so this is how the ancient world lived, is this ongoing idea that the gods were angry by their very nature. They're angry, and your job was to appease the wrath of the gods. So this is how you understood. If there was a plague or a natural disaster or a drought that affected your village, it was assumed that the gods are angry and have withheld health or have withheld rain or whatever it might be. And the issue is us, that we didn't do enough. We didn't do enough to appease the wrath of the gods, so we need to make more sacrifices. We need to pray harder. We need to do all these things. And when life was good, you thought, oh, we've appeased the gods and therefore the gods are blessing us. So the world has lived under this concept that there are these gods and they walk in their own world. They're either on the top of Mount Olympus or beyond the cosmos. And our job is to appease the gods, because the gods would, do you know this? It wasn't unusual for the Greek and Roman gods to visit planet Earth. They visited planet Earth. They came and they took on human form, but they always came for three reasons. One of three reasons: to test a person, to punish a person, or to sire a child. So when the gods came to Earth, they came to test you, to punish you, or they found you highly attractive and wanted to have a child with you. And this is where all the demigods come from. They're half God and half man, okay? And here's what John says. These gods, we've lived under their shadow. We've lived in fear of them. And we've never known their nature. John says when Jesus came, he came and he showed us who God really is. He's a God of grace. He's a God of truth. Now, let's explore that for a minute. Grace. Grace is a word that I find very, very difficult to define. Grace, it's about kindness and love and forgiveness. In fact, just yesterday, I was at the home of a beloved woman in this church, and she passed on, and as we were there in her living room, we're praying. The word I used to describe her is she was a woman of grace. What did I mean by that? I meant that she endured hardship with joy. It meant that she was kind and loving and compassionate. It meant all these words that I can't even express them all, but this word of grace, it describes it all. And so John says this: here's what you got to know about God. You've always wondered, is he a God of wrath? Is he frustrated with you? No, he is a God of grace. He's a God of second chances, but he is also, you can't just choose that one. He's a God of truth. That we've wanted to define God, but now God has come to planet Earth and he's defined himself. So how do you know what grace and truth look like? I just encourage you to read the 4 books that are the biographies of Jesus, because you see grace and you see truth. You see a God in Jesus who embraces people that everyone else was done with, who gives second chances, who speaks words of encouragement and life. But you also see a God who is true, who says the things that clarify what life is really about. Truth, later in the book of John, John chapter 14, Jesus is going to say something audacious. He's going to say this: I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man can come to the Father except through me. So in a pluralistic first century culture, Jesus, your truth is that you're the only way? Like, what about my gods? And I'm really committed to them. And Jesus says, here's the truth, like it or not. I am the way, the truth, the life. Nobody can get to the Father but through me. So we've got to take his grace and we've got to take his truth. Because if I can't take his truth, I'll make up my own truth. I'll make up my own morality. Whatever is most convenient for me. And here's what John says. We now know what God is like. He could have used 100 words to describe him. But he says, if you want to know who God is, look at the life of Jesus. He's a God of grace and a God of truth. He is not a God of wrath. He's not a God of disappointment. So then we have these beautiful words that emanate from this. You've seen probably already on a Christmas card or an ornament, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, which means this: God with us. El is the Hebrew proper name for God. God with us. This radical idea that Isaiah the prophet gave 750 years before Jesus was born, that one day God would be with us and we'd finally be able to understand who God is. Theologically, it's called the incarnation, that God enters the human condition. And we won't recognize him because it's not what we would think. Because he's a God of grace and a God of truth, not a God of power or manipulation. So Jesus undid the confusion regarding the nature of God. Here's the second thing. Jesus undid the darkness that had enveloped us, the darkness that had enveloped us. And it wasn't just a flash, but it was this ongoing revelation. So this is where John goes all the way back to these images of light and life. And he says, so when the Creator returns, the form of an infant, carried in a woman's womb, and then endures everything that a human being can endure, and then at 30 years old steps forward and begins to tell everybody who he is and what he's doing. He says what he brought was light, and he brought life. See, light to us is, we take light for granted, don't we? But I just want you to go back 100 years. 100 years, 120 years. Light was a completely different reality. We can come in this room. Do you notice this room? We create rooms without windows, right? Why? Because we just flip on lights. It's illuminated, right? Even, you ever realize like those moments you're becoming like your dad? I'll drive home from work some days and like every light in the house is on and I expect everybody to be there. And I'm like, nobody's here. Why'd they leave the lights on? Like, give me a quarter. You left the lights on in your bedroom. Give me a quarter. Because light is just convenient for us. So believe it or not, there's actually a book out there written by a woman named Jane Brock on the evolution of artificial light. And then there's a professor at Yale. He's an economics professor at Yale by the name of Bill Nordhaus. And they put together this study on light. And I think it's worth us to reflect on it a little bit because when we read this, light means one thing. To the ancient world, light meant something completely different. So for about 4,000 years, and before that, from the Babylonians all the way up until the 16th century, light came from two sources. Now, people in the British Isles, they could capture this one petrel, which was a type of bird that ate oily fish. And on Christmas, the shortest day of the year, you'd capture a petrel and you'd light it on fire. You'd kill it first. And then it would provide a half hour of light. But you did that once a year to celebrate the shortest day of the year. I've never burned a bird, but I imagine it's fairly unpleasant, right? You have the light. Northern tribes in Scandinavia, in the US, in North America, there are certain salmon that you could burn, but you did that once a year. But here's how the whole world survived. You survived on, if you're in the Mediterranean, on olive oil. You know how many olives you have to press to get enough for one lamp? Or animal fat. You melted the fat and sew it down to create something. But this is what life was like for 4,000 years. It would take 1 day's wages would provide you with 10 minutes of light. 10 minutes. You would work for an entire day. And then you could go to the market and you could buy enough oil or suet for 10 minutes of light. So for those of you who don't live in Yellowstone County, maybe you live somewhere south of here, do you know what time the sun is gonna set today? 4:29 p.m. And it's gonna come up at 7 something. We're going to have 15 hours of darkness here in the Arctic, okay? 15 hours of darkness. Imagine what your life would be like if You could work all day and you could buy 10 minutes of light with your daily wage. How many candles are you gonna burn at night? Like, once it gets dark, it's over, right? You're gonna sit there, and darkness to the ancient world was always fearful. Because this is when bad things happened spiritually. This is when the ghouls and the goblins came out. And you had no capacity to bring light to drive off the fear. But then, really bad for the whales, but fairly good for human beings. Whale blubber's discovered, and people start harvesting whales. And now the economy changes. 1 day's wages can purchase 1 hour of light. So imagine you have 1 hour of light to spread between 7 days. Still, you're living in almost utter darkness and fear. And then this revolutionary thing comes along called kerosene. And kerosene changes the economy. Kerosene will give you 5 hours of light for 1 day's worth of wages. Okay, 5 hours of light. This was like, okay, now average people can have just a half hour of light at night. Then an American named Edison comes along and electricity. Now, light is one of the cheapest commodities that we have. For 1 day's wage, you can get 20,000 hours of light. It went from 10 minutes to 20,000. So when we read this, we probably don't read it like the original hearers. We read it like, oh yeah, light, like a light bulb, like a flashlight. I've got lights that I can put on my head. I've got lights on my cars. I've got lights outside. I've got Christmas lights. Can you imagine? I wasn't even a dream. When it got dark, you came inside and you locked the doors. And you just laid there in bed, waiting for dawn. So John says, when God came to earth, he brought light. He brought life. Because life is dependent on light. And it wasn't just this physical darkness that we struggled with. It was the spiritual darkness. It was the chaos and the loneliness and the isolation from our Creator. And when Jesus came, the same God that hung the stars in their place now brings the ability for me to be born once again. Born not just as a human being, but born of God. Born to be a son or a daughter of the Creator. In him was light. And that light was the life for all of humanity. Jesus came to undo our confusion regarding the nature of God. And Jesus came to undo the perpetual darkness that had enveloped human life.